Okay, this is lesson 3, looking at the vascular system for applied anatomy and physiology. So by the end of the lesson, hopefully you'll be able to describe and explain the cardiovascular drift, and also describe the structure and function of arteries, veins and capillaries. Okay, so this graph is used to represent cardiovascular drift. So during steady state exercise, such as jogging at low intensity, the heart rate is expected to remain the same throughout. However, recent research has shown this doesn't actually happen as you would expect. So we've already looked at the heart, and we're going to look at stroke volume, pulse rate and cardiac output, and the relationship between pulse rate and stroke volume during exercise. So if you look at the graph, first of all we have the pulse rate on the dotted line, which obviously quite clearly goes up, and then we've got the stroke volume, the clear black line in the middle, starts to go up, and then after a period of time it actually goes back down again, and cardiac output gradually increases. So first of all, an important time frame is after 10 minutes of this exercise in a warm environment, the performer starts to sweat. This sweating is going to cause a lot of the fluid that is in your blood to be lost through the skin, and this decreases the plasma volume, so the volume of your blood. And if we've got a decrease in the plasma volume, this in turn is going to decrease the venous return, which is the blood going back to the heart in the veins, remember. And if it decreases the venous return, remember when we looked at Starling's law? Starling's law said that if we increase venous return, we get an increase in stroke volume because of greater filling and a greater stretch. Well, this doesn't happen. So after 10 minutes in a warm environment, we start to sweat, our venous return actually decreases because of that decrease in blood volume. As a result, the heart rate, or pulse rate as it's measured on the graph, has to keep increasing to compensate for the decrease in stroke volume. Remember, if we want to remain the same cardiac output, if stroke volume goes down, then our pulse rate needs to go up. Now, you'd normally expect it to level off at some point, but recent research has shown that in a warm environment that doesn't happen, and it's because of this loss of blood volume from sweat. The cardiac output has to keep increasing slowly to cool the body, and this is known as the cardiovascular drift. To minimize this, then it's really important that athletes maintain high fluid consumption so they avoid dehydration. So, just the key points: cardiovascular drift, 10 minutes in a warm environment, you start to sweat. As you start to sweat, you lose fluid from the blood, which decreases the plasma volume. This in turn decreases the venous return and therefore the stroke volume. So the heart rate has to keep rising and keep going up, and it doesn't plateau off to compensate for that. That's cardiovascular drift. Okay, now we're going to look at the structure and function of arteries, veins and capillaries. So this is a diagram of the vascular system, in fact the cardiovascular system. Now we've already looked at the heart, but now we're going to look at the vessels that go in and kind of leave the heart. And there's two types of circulation. The pulmonary circulation is anything to do with the lungs. So that's deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs, and oxygenated blood back to the heart again from the lungs. And then the systemic circulation is in the bottom half, which takes oxygenated blood to the body from the heart via the aorta, and then the return of deoxygenated blood from the body back to the heart in the vena cava. And that is all shown in that diagram there. Now we need to know the structure of these vessels that are involved. The three main blood vessels that we need to look at are arteries, veins and capillaries. And we're going to compare the structure and function of each of those. So arteries, first of all, if you look on the left hand side, you can see that the arteries are very different than veins. We're going to look at those differences. Just at the top there, we've got a kind of direction from the heart. So from the heart, arteries carry blood away from the heart. They branch off into arterioles, and then with the muscles and the tissues, they branch off into capillaries. From the capillaries turn back into venules, which branch off into veins, which take the deoxygenated blood back to the heart again. So that's the kind of distribution of blood. So let's have a look at the arteries first of all. As you can see from the diagram on the left hand side, they've got a thick elastic wall, whereas veins have a thinner, much less elastic wall. Capillaries actually have no outer or middle layer, so they're only one layer thick. Arteries also have a small lumen. Now a lumen is the hole inside the actual artery itself. So if you look at the hole, because it's got a thicker wall, it's got a smaller lumen, whereas veins have a much larger lumen. And capillaries, because they're so small, they have a microscopic lumen. It's really difficult to see. The arteries have a smooth muscle layer, whereas the veins don't have as much smooth muscle inside them, and capillaries are actually only one cell thick. In terms of what they do, arteries carry blood under high pressure and high velocity, and that is because of the small lumen and also the thick layer, whereas veins carry blood under low pressure and medium velocity. Now the low pressure comes from the fact that the lumen is larger, so it's got a larger lumen. That means that there's less pressure going through. Think about a hose pipe. If you put your finger over the end of the hose pipe and decrease the size of the hole, i.e. the lumen, then you increase the pressure of the water coming out. The veins are exactly the same. Because it's got a larger lumen, it's under low pressure. And capillaries carry blood under very low pressure and very low velocity, and that's really important so that the gases of oxygen and carbon dioxide have chance to be exchanged. Direction: the arteries carry blood away from the heart, away, whereas veins carry blood back to the heart. And in terms of capillaries, what their job is to deliver oxygen and glucose to the tissues, and it also removes waste products such as lactic acid and carbon dioxide from the tissues. And finally, arteries don't have any valves, whereas veins have non-return valves which prevent backflow and keep blood flowing in the right direction. And capillaries don't need these, they have no valves. So we need to know some characteristics of arteries, veins and capillaries, and also the function of what they do and how they relate to each other. Okay, so we've described and explained the cardiovascular drift and also the structure and function of arteries, veins and capillaries.